got a lot of people worried about you, so we came check you out.
Tonight, Ida's fury coming into focus after pounding southern Louisiana. The desperate rescue effort now underway. The area is cut off from the world right now. The harrowing stories of survival. Our team on the ground tonight in Louisiana.
This entire town is submerged.
And tonight, the devastating storm is moving north. A city without power, a catastrophic transmission failure in New Orleans fueling concern about drinking water, and sewage failures as a city of nearly 1 million is now in the dark. And it could be weeks, not days, until the power is back. Our Victor Oquendo in New Orleans tonight. And what comes next for this massive storm? Why did it pummel so many communities? And how did it strengthen so rapidly? Our chief meteorologist, Ginger Z, is also on the ground in New Orleans. Overseas tonight, the final U.S. evacuation flight has left Afghanistan. The frantic multi-week evacuation now over. Tens of thousands brought to safety. The Pentagon says planes left at a rate of nearly 1 every 20 minutes. Hundreds of Afghans crowding the airport gates. But were any Americans left behind? And what about the Afghan allies Americans were not able to get out? Tonight, California's crown jewel, Lake Tahoe, under threat as the Caldor fire rapidly intensifies. Flames tearing through part of a beloved ski resort, and now South Lake Tahoe, usually filled with tourists, under an evacuation order tonight. The urgent push to slow the flames and save a beautiful lakeside community. Good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Lipoff in for Lindsay Davis tonight. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Tonight, we are following the breaking news out of Afghanistan. The last U.S. plane has left Kabul. Our team standing by tonight with more on the final chapter of America's longest war. But first, we begin tonight with Hurricane Ida's wrath and the desperate search for survivors in areas still underwater at this hour. Ida making landfall early yesterday in Port Fourchon, Louisiana, as a powerful Category 4 storm. Winds of up to 150 miles per hour, gusts of more than 70 miles per hour. The storm stalling for hours over southeast Louisiana, walloping communities, putting entire neighborhoods underwater, and forcing some residents to attics, even roofs. The wind causing a catastrophic transmission failure in New Orleans. Tonight, nearly all of a city of about 1 million people is in the dark, and it could be that way for days or even weeks. But tonight, the major concern is for the areas that aren't yet reachable or only by boat. How many people may be in need of urgent help? We have team coverage from Louisiana tonight. Our Victor Oquendo in New Orleans, Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z standing by with where Ida is headed next. But first, our Matt Gutman leads us off tonight on the frantic search for life.
Hurricane Ida slamming Louisiana as a monstrous Category 4 with reported wind gusts topping 170 miles per hour. And tonight, the scope of the destruction becoming easier to see, but harder to bear. Entire communities almost wiped off the map. More than 1 million customers now without power. The outages could last for weeks, and officials fear the death toll will rise.
There's somebody in there, I think.
The massive search and rescue operation ramping up since the storm hit. This woman pulled out of her flooded car. We traveled to hard-hit La Place, just west of New Orleans. Rescuers in boats and helicopters desperately trying to reach those trapped in flooded homes. Where the town had been, now a lake, accessible only by boat and by aircraft. Scenes defying the imagination. The hurricane toppling semi-trucks, submerging cars. Helicopters swooping down, landing on Interstate 10 to scoop up the most vulnerable, including that woman in the wheelchair.
Need help?
As we arrived, we saw the storm's refugees walking off that exit ramp, carrying what was most dear. Some of them trying to hitch rides from strangers. All of them hoping to get to safety. Michael from the Cajun Navy offered to take us in.
This entire town is submerged. We're driving on the main street.
And there we saw a flotilla of small boats on the water, carrying out the stranded and the exhausted. And it was on dry land that we met these two.
You guys didn't expect it would be this bad, did you?
We didn't expect it to be this bad, and we stayed because we were in a 2-story home, and we thought we would have been safe. The rain just kept coming. It wouldn't stop coming. The rain wouldn't stop.
We pushed further into La Place, seeing entire neighborhoods submerged. The stranded flagging down anyone with a boat.
Look where the line at. That's where the water was at.
Jackie and Denise Cooper's mother, Lucille, is disabled, and they asked me to help get her down the stairs.
You guys gonna come back?
No.
Did you think at any point that you might not make it?
Yeah?
Michael had gone back to get help. He needed more boats. Sure enough, within half an hour, he was back. We then drove to the hard-hit city of Houma. On the way, so much destruction. That pair of helicopters flying low, looking for survivors. Ida tearing across Grand Isle like a buzzsaw. New images tonight showing the barrier island underwater. Officials tonight still haven't been able to reach many of the dozens of people who stayed behind there in defiance of mandatory evacuation orders, but helicopter crews reportedly saw people on their rooftops giving the thumbs up. Just over 30 miles from there, the Coast Guard surveying the damage near Galliano for the first time. Homes shredded, roads flooded. This chopper flying a patient to a hospital. At least one levee was overtopped in Plaquemines Parish, south of the city, and reports of people trapped in their attics in Jefferson Parish.
This is an area that, if you want to think of it like swampland, there's alligators out there.
Our Ginger Z in nearby Jefferson Parish, just south of New Orleans.
The town of Lafitte has one way in and one way out, and that one way is covered by water. They are protected up to 7 feet. Their levees were overtopped during the storm.
Rescuers doing everything they can to reach survivors.
From house to house, we're going past them, and if people want to be evacuated, we're putting them on the boats to get them out.
President Biden declaring a major disaster in Louisiana, promising a vast federal response.
That's our job. If we work together, we're going to stand with you and the people of the Gulf as long as it takes for you to recover.
Now tonight, the concern in the hours ahead is the people still stuck in their homes without 911 and without power. Many now turning to social media.
Right now, we're checking on everybody that we can.
Concerned families messaging Vincent Ocello over Facebook, asking him to check on their missing loved ones. And stranded residents reportedly giving a thumbs up to the Coast Guard waiting to get out.
Matt Gutman joins us now from Houma. Matt, we can see some destruction behind you. Walk us through just how difficult it is to move around in that area and how that could be hampering rescue efforts.
It absolutely is hampering rescue efforts, Phil. I can't tell you how many telephone poles we saw that are down. You can see this tree completely obliterated by the storm, trees down everywhere. Roads are impassable, and the infrastructure damage is so significant, especially when you're talking about the power grid, but also phone towers. So there's no communication, makes rescue efforts very, very difficult. We even saw officers from State Patrol on the roadways who said even our radios aren't working. They were listening to the radio in the dashboard of their vehicles to try to get information. So still very chaotic, but lots of people out here, everybody helping out from almost every imaginable agency, Phil.
Matt, you've been out there all day tracking the rescue effort. We even saw you in your story there helping one woman out yourself. What struck you the most out of everything you've seen so far?
I think it was the synergy, Phil, in Laplace, you know, that town that was completely submerged. We jumped in with the Cajun Navy. There were all these people. They didn't know each other. They just came out to where they thought people might need help, and that's what they did. So they were scooping anybody they could into the boats, even until the boats were really sinking in the water, taking them to that interstate. People were trudging up the interstate, getting to the top of that ramp, and then these Coast Guard helicopters, National Guard helicopters, landing on the interstate to scoop these people up and take them to safety in New Orleans or a hospital, wherever they were taking them, but clearly out of harm's way. That sort of encapsulates everything, the thousands of guardsmen and agents from local and federal agencies, just the synergistic effort that is very organic at this point. Hundreds of people have been rescued, I'm told. Certainly the Cajun Navy is going to continue working until it's very dark, and they're going to pick right back up in the morning, Phil.
A true team effort it will take. Matt Gutman, thanks so much. All right, joining us now on the phone is State Representative Jerome Zerang, who represents Houma, one of the communities that bore the brunt of this storm. First of all, Representative, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Hello, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Before we get to your area, you live in the area that you represent, obviously. So let's talk about how are you? How's your family? What have the last 48 hours been like for you personally?
Well, like for most people around here, it was rough with the storm passing through. Fortunately, I got most of my family out. We stayed behind. My wife and I stayed behind. And just rode it out. But we are blessed to the degree that we are fine. Our house is still up. You know, like everybody else's, it took a little damage, but we're here, we're safe, and we have a roof, unlike a lot of people around here.
16 years ago, when Katrina hit, places like Bay St. Louis and Waveland, Mississippi, took the brunt of that storm as it came onto shore. Your community did the same this time. We understand that there are reports of damage all over the community. Can you describe it to us?
It has. You know, within Terrebonne Parish, other states have counties, but within our parish, there's extensive damage here, but also to the east as well in Lafourche and heading toward Grand Isle. But, you know, our community took the extensive wind force. The eye passed just to the east of us, so we were in the eye wall or just adjacent to the eye wall throughout most of the storm. We were, you know, registering over 120-mile-an-hour wind for over 3 hours, you know, constant. So we were just, you know, getting beat. Our community was getting beat pretty bad, and the lower-lying areas closer to the Gulf took significant hits as well.
Representative, when you were getting hit like that, I don't think a lot of people, unless they have been through it, have actually experienced and can know what that is like. Those winds, that mile per hour for that long, what was that like? What did it sound like?
You know, you hear from different people who describe it in different ways, and it's like anything else. You know, it's kind of like what my wife often says about childbirth. You can explain it to people until you experience it. You really can't appreciate it. And similarly, unless you're feeling the house shake and you're hearing the roar of the wind and the constant knock, you know, the windows rattling and it's just constant, and you're hoping and praying it's going to let up soon, and it just continues. And it's pretty impressive, the force of Mother Nature, but it also gives you a deep appreciation for what you have. And again, you know, there are no atheists in the eye wall, I can promise you, because you start if you haven't found religion, you'll find it quick.
Deep appreciation for life as well, I'm sure. As Houma shifts into recovery and now deals with the daunting prospect of weeks, possibly weeks without power, what does your community need the most right now?
Well, I was just over at the EOC, and we are without over 98% of the parish is without power. Also, the water is out and no gas. A lot of people rely on natural gas and to run either generators to operate when the utilities are down. So there's gas services are out, water's out. With the trees uprooted a lot of the lines, and until that infrastructure can be repaired, it's going to be tough around here for weeks. So obviously we need support in terms of ice tarps, because, you know, in Louisiana we get a lot of rain, and just because the storm passed, we are going to have typical summertime weather, and that's thunderstorms usually in the afternoon when it heats up. So a lot of the roofs are exposed now, and there's going to be persistent rain. So tarps, ice, food, trying to get grocery stores and basic services back online. But for the most part, those are the basic things: food and ice and water right now.
And Representative, that's what happens in a normal year. That area sees so many hurricanes. People know how to deal with it, but this is in the middle of a pandemic. How does that complicate things?
Yeah, and there's no doubt in Louisiana you experience it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. I mean, you know, the unfortunate reality is whenever a named storm enters the Gulf of Mexico, the highest probability of it making landfall is Louisiana. So we deal with this, unfortunately, and we help each other out. That's part of the culture, the people. We know we're going to deal with this, and we get together as a community and we help each other out. But you're right. With a pandemic, it just exacerbates the problems that we have. And not only that, it also for, you know, support services. You know, I can understand and fully appreciate when we're in a pandemic, when we have first responders, and that's why I have the utmost respect and admiration for the people who are willing to leave their families and help out to come not only after a storm under normal conditions, but on top of a pandemic and exposing yourself to that. So we know it's going to be a challenge, and it will be, and that just exacerbates the problem. But we're so thankful for all the first responders and the people who are willing to sacrifice and come and help us out. We do need help, but we're very appreciative and thankful for the fact that there are people who are willing to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much help, even down to, you know, like the Cajun Army, the folks who drive around in boats and rescue people. But everybody's offering help. Everybody wants to help. But the federal government and FEMA seem to jump on this early. What are you expecting to see in terms of rescue, relief, recovery from the federal government? And do you think it's coming fast enough?
Well, like anyone else, it never seems to be fast enough. But, you know, again, we know it's having gone through this, we know it's just not as simple as flipping a switch and getting everything back to normal again. You just have to methodically work through the process where you're putting on a system back online, and it takes a while. But as much as can be done, I think, you know, the governor has declared an emergency. We've had our parish presidents and those who have experienced it before have completed and filled out all the necessary paperwork. It's now just a matter of getting the resources here, and anything that can be done to expedite that would be appreciated. But we do know it's going to, you know, take search and rescue right now is the critical issue. Now, fortunately, that in our area, there have been some issues, but for the most part, a lot of people, because of the magnitude of the storm, did get out. And that has helped, but obviously it's just going to be slow in terms of recovery. But we just make sure that, you know, we work together and address these issues and get the resources that we need to the right place.
Representing Houma State Representative Jerome Zerang, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We know you are in the middle of this cleanup effort. We are glad that your family is okay. We're glad you're okay, and we hope everyone in your parish is as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you much. Thank you for the call. And again, thank you for everyone who is helping out. We really do appreciate it, and God bless.
All right, let's turn now to New Orleans. Hurricane Ida, the strongest to strike there since Katrina back in 2005. This time, the levees did hold, but the power grid has been knocked out. ABC's Victor Oquendo has the latest from New Orleans.
Tonight, with most of New Orleans paralyzed without power, officials are warning it could be weeks or more. The storm, the strongest to hit the city since Hurricane Katrina 16 years ago to the day.
The winds keep picking up, and this rain has just been relentless. Watch as it just rips right down this street in downtown New Orleans.
Orleans Parish losing power. Lights from emergency vehicles piercing the darkness on New Orleans city streets. 1 million in the dark. The utilities rebuilt after Katrina did not hold. This massive transmission tower mangled, power lines falling into the Mississippi River. Ida damaging all 8 transmission lines that supply the New Orleans area with electricity.
Here's a look at Hurricane Ida's aftermath. This power pole crashing right down on top of this car. It also looks like it snapped in half. You've got these down lines. They stretch clear across the block. And then take a look at that house down there. Another pole coming down right on the roof.
Leah Marchand had power until 7 p.m. and then
I screamed. It was a big, huge flash. And then there was traveling fireballs arcing up and down the lines.
You saw this happening?
Yes, they were green and purple and orange.
Officials say the pumps that keep the floodwater out of New Orleans are running on generators, and the levees and flood walls built after Katrina held.
The worst case scenario, it did not happen. However, the impact is absolutely significant.
High winds blowing off roofing and shattering hospital windows. Ochsner Health says they're transferring 165 hospital patients out of hard-hit zones.
We got some of the water and the mechanicals, and that's why we're evacuating the facility until we can make sure we got everything tuned up and ready to go again.
With hospitals in Louisiana and much of the Gulf Coast filled with COVID patients, they had to shelter in place. And hospitals reinforced after Katrina largely held too. Generators keeping the power going.
Victor Oquendo joins me now from New Orleans. Victor, we saw those images of hospitals sustaining damage and the evacuations. Tell us, how are the hospitals doing right now?
Phil, we've checked in with several hospitals in the region. Many of them did lose power, and they are running off of generators. Some sustained external damage, and those in the really hard-hit areas did have to transport some of their patients, but other hospitals have pitched in to help. And while the circumstances are incredibly difficult, it does seem like the plan that they had in place is working. Phil?
And Victor, we know many residents weren't able to get out in time, to evacuate in time, and they are now without power like so many. What are officials there saying about when they will know how long the power will need to be out?
Phil, the largest provider in the area, Energy, they were saying that it's going to take days just to assess how bad the damage is, and then much longer to restore power to the entire region, possibly up to 3 weeks. We just spoke with a woman here who says she was told it might take up to a month. Phil?
All right, Victor Oquendo, thank you. All right, now let's bring in Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z in New Orleans tonight. Ginger, good evening.
Good evening to you, Phil. Right behind me, more damage. We've been around collapsed buildings a lot today, but under this one, 2 vehicles. And here's a little story for you. One of those vehicles is owned by the woman who lives next door, who happens to be an insurance adjuster. So just one of the many places impacted here beyond New Orleans. We went around today, and I've got to tell you, after I tell you about what we have in this forecast, you have to hear how people are so resilient here, yet very concerned. So let's go ahead and get into it. You can see the rest of Ida. It's now a depression spinning over central Mississippi. It's still pulling water toward the Florida Panhandle. So you're still seeing thunderstorms there. We've seen tornadoes throughout today, flash flood watches that extend through Kentucky, western North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, much of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and even New York. So what are we talking? Timing-wise, it's central Tennessee, which was so hard hit a couple of weeks ago, getting it tomorrow night. Then that's Atlanta into North Georgia, too. Remember, Huntsville, you could get some of that. Go and slide it up Wednesday night, and you're really talking about much of Maryland into Scranton, Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey. Wednesday night through early Thursday is when it finally makes its way all the way over I-95. Here's the problem, is some of Appalachia could have more than a half foot of rain. You get elevation, you're already super saturated up there. We're seeing big numbers come in for monthly and even annual rainfall in parts of the Northeast. So this is only going to add to that. And the flash flood threat is real.
Ginger, every hurricane, as you tell us, has its own characteristics. Tell us why Ida was so devastating, and what were you able to see yourself as you drove around the city and the region today?
There were so many parts of Ida that make it unique. I would go ahead and start with this. If you look at, what we're standing in front of here, there are buildings here that made it through Katrina, and then they did not in this one. The power grid going down again. Beyond here, places like Lafitte, Louisiana, one of the parishes, all the parishes that did not have levee protection to the extent that New Orleans does, they had never seen this much water. They have protection to 7 feet. They certainly overtopped. That is where people were in their attics, or at least reportedly so. We tried to get in there today. There were lots of rescue boats, but a lot of, it seemed, confusion. And then when you walk around the streets in New Orleans, I think the biggest concern is that people say, listen, how long are we talking when it comes to power? Because if we lost one of the main components to our power grid, is it going to be weeks? Could it be more than a month? When power goes, water gets really short. They're already asking people to hold back on water, and then sewage is a concern too. So a true human crisis potentially developing.
Absolutely. And Ginger, before you go, this is the 3rd major hurricane in just the last year for Louisiana alone. Talk to us a bit, if you will, about how climate change is altering these storms and making them more intense.
Well, there's no question that a hurricane eats and is fueled by warm water. Sea surface temperatures have been rising. If you look at what was happening ahead of Ida, there was a whole 3 to 4 degrees above average right at and before landfall. So that area that was covered in that warm water was fueling, and certainly can be attributed, as ones in the past have, to a warming climate. Would we have had a hurricane? Yes. Could it have intensified quite as rapidly or quite as badly as it did? That's something that we'll find out when the climate scientists go back and look. But I'm guessing from other things that we've seen that the answer will be yes.
Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z, thank you. And when we come back, more evacuations being ordered as the massive Caldor fire gets dangerously close to the popular Lake Tahoe region. The surge of children sick with COVID just as more and more return to the classroom. But up next, the end of our longest war, the historic moment which would have taken up much of our show on any other night. We're going to have a lot more on the end of 20 years of fighting in Afghanistan. Next.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Wake up with America's #1 most watched morning show. ABC's
Good Morning America.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
Right now, with so much at stake, thank you for making ABC's This Week with George the #1 Sunday morning news show versus the competition.
Welcome to This Week.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live. This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people
Squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new Hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
18 days ago, the United States and our allies began our evacuation and relocation operation in Kabul. As you just heard from the Pentagon, a few hours ago, that operation was completed. More than 123,000 people have been safely flown out of Afghanistan. That includes about 6,000 American citizens. This has been a massive military, diplomatic, and humanitarian undertaking, one of the most difficult in our nation's history, and an extraordinary feat of logistics and coordination under some of the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Many, many people made this possible. I want to commend our outstanding diplomats who worked around the clock and around the world to coordinate the operation. They volunteered for duty at the Kabul airport. They flew to transit countries to help process thousands of Afghans bound for the United States. They deployed to ports of entry and American military bases to welcome Afghans to their new homes. They staffed a 24/7 task force here in Washington, overseen by Deputy Secretary Brian McKeon. And they built a list of Americans possibly seeking to leave Afghanistan, then worked to contact every single one of them, repeatedly, making 55,000 phone calls, sending 33,000 emails since August 14th. They solved problem after problem to keep the mission moving forward. U.S. service members in Kabul did heroic work, securing the airport, protecting civilians of many nationalities, including tens of thousands of Afghans, and airlifting them out. They're also providing vital support right now, caring for Afghans on military bases in Europe, the Middle East, and here in the United States. And we will never forget their sacrifice, nor will we forget what they achieved.
That was Secretary of State Blinken speaking about today's withdrawal and what comes next. After 20 years, the war in Afghanistan is now officially over. It ended just hours before President Biden's August 31st withdrawal timeline that he set. As you know, for the last 2 weeks, the headlines have been dizzying, from the frantic evacuation at the Kabul airport to a terror attack last week. We've learned that in just 18 days, more than 120,000 people were airlifted out. The urgency began after the Taliban's stunningly fast takeover of Afghanistan. And of course, the grief over the deaths of 13 servicemen and women, the last to give their lives to this war. ABC's chief foreign correspondent Ian Pannell has more on the end of the conflict and where it leaves America and its reputation.
With the final flights out of Kabul late today, four-star Marine General Frank McKenzie saying America's longest war was over after almost 20 years.
The last C-17 lifted off from Hamid Karzai International Airport on August 30th this afternoon at 3:29 p.m. East Coast time. And the last manned aircraft is now clearing the airspace above Afghanistan.
Nearly 20 years since the attacks of 9/11 and the killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011. Troops staying on the ground for another decade. The general speaking of the human cost of war. The American service members lost 2.
It was not a cheap mission. The cost was 2,461 U.S. service members and civilians killed and more than 20,000 who were injured. Sadly, that includes 13 U.S. service members who were killed last week by an ISIS-K suicide bomber.
He spoke of this painful loss of the service members this week and was asked about the remaining Americans and Afghan allies and the interpreters who helped the U.S. over the years.
Look, there's a lot of heartbreak associated with this departure. We did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out.
The general saying this final chapter was perhaps one of the most painful. The crowds outside the gate and the loss of the 13 service members. When asked about the U.S. servicemen and women that were in Afghanistan, he said this.
Every single U.S. service member is now out of Afghanistan. I can say that with 100% certainty.
And General McKenzie, who did multiple tours in Afghanistan, was asked about leaving this country to Taliban control.
I was very conflicted, actually. But right now, I'm pretty much consumed with the operational task at hand.
Ian Pannell joins us now from Doha, Qatar, where most of those evacuated flights first landed. Ian, you were there when Kabul fell and the Taliban fled, and 2 decades later when the Taliban pretty much just walked back into Kabul. Were you surprised by the degree of coordination between the Taliban and U.S. forces in those final days as revealed to us by the Pentagon? And is that, do you think, a sliver of hope that the Taliban may in fact moderate as they've claimed?
I mean, I think many people will be surprised by the announcements of that level of cooperation. But personally, no, I'm not particularly surprised. I mean, everyone kept talking about from the administration that if the Taliban attacked American forces on the base and they would respond, I always felt that was something of a red herring, because the truth is that America had an agreement with the Taliban that was cut here in Doha by the Trump administration. They've been coordinating and cooperating for a long time because they both essentially wanted the same thing. The Americans wanted to withdraw, knowing that they wouldn't be attacked. The Taliban wanted them to leave and agreed not to attack them. So throughout that whole drawdown period, I'm pretty sure there was almost no incident at all where the Taliban attacked U.S. forces as they fled. They attacked U.S. forces as they left. But the Afghan forces, of course, when they were trying to take on the Taliban, they did flee, and the Taliban attacked them mercilessly. They also had to cooperate at the airport to try and make this happen. Does that offer hope for the future? I'm not entirely convinced, because the Taliban have made a number of promises that they haven't really lived up to, promises about the rights of girls and women, promises that they made when I spoke to the Taliban at their first press conference that they would ensure the safe passage of American SIV applicants and American passport holders. Well, had that happened in an orderly fashion, then perhaps we wouldn't now be talking about the fact that Americans and Afghan allies have been left behind tonight. So I think we have to wait and see. There's a UN resolution calling for safe passage. The Taliban have given public statements saying they'll allow it to happen. But what we're hearing on the ground from people who have all the right paperwork is that if they're stopped in the street by the Taliban, they'll confiscate the paperwork and potentially arrest, detain, and who knows what else to those people who are just trying to get out, who were promised safe passage.
Yeah, and now the world will watch and wait. Ian Pannell, thank you. Now we bring in Martha Raddatz to help us get a sense of the risk right now. Martha, we heard General McKenzie describe the equipment left behind in Afghanistan, 27 Humvees, 73 aircraft. The general saying they have been demilitarized and that they will never drive or fly again. But he also noted that there are about 2,000 ISIS terrorists in that country. So how real is the risk of Afghanistan becoming another terrorist stronghold like so many fear?
Well, Phil, what the general did not mention, he was talking about the equipment, first of all, at the airport that the U.S. military just left there in the last few weeks. What he really didn't talk about is all the equipment, billions of dollars of equipment that we gave the Afghan forces over the years, including about 600,000 arms, tens of thousands of rockets, Humvees. That will be scattered throughout Afghanistan. Taliban can take it, and ISIS can take it. He talked about 2,000 hardcore fighters. That figure really surprised me, how many the Pentagon were saying was there. And the Taliban says the ISIS is their enemy, but the Taliban let the ISIS fighters out of prison by the thousands. So I do think that threat remains and could grow worse. And Al-Qaeda isn't completely gone either. Phil?
Martha, while we have you, just briefly, you've been to Afghanistan countless times. You communicate constantly with our brave men and women in uniform. Obviously, opinions will vary. It's not a monolith. But what's the general sentiment about 20 years of sacrifice ending like this?
I think if you'd asked some of those service members and some I talked to about whether they thought it was time to withdraw from Afghanistan, they might have said yes, it's time to withdraw after 20 years. But it's how this was done, how we left, how we didn't know the Taliban. After all those 20 years of dealing with the Taliban and fighting the Taliban, how we didn't realize how rapidly they could take over that country. So there is deep disappointment, and I think that really is a very broad, deep disappointment, and in some cases disgust on how this evacuation happened and why the U.S. did it so rapidly without knowing we would have people remaining Afghan allies. That's really what they're most upset about, leaving those people behind who helped them out in battle. Phil?
Martha Raddatz, thanks so much. So we do have a pretty clear picture of what happened today, not what happens next. So I want to bring in Congressman John Katko, top Republican on the House Homeland Security Committee. Congressman, thanks for taking the time again with us tonight.
Thank you for having me here.
The U.S., as you know, has completed its withdrawal from Afghanistan, including every U.S. service member now out of the country, ending our 20-year presence there. I know you were opposed to this withdrawal, so first I just want to get your take on how this all played out in the last 2 weeks since the Taliban took Kabul.
Well, I just heard a general say, or one of the military leaders say, he was, quote unquote, conflicted about leaving Afghanistan and leaving the terrorists behind. Conflicted is a colossal understatement. And he also said that they did not get everyone out. Those are two things that we were assured that wasn't going to happen, and now we have that. We have a terrorist state, a state-sponsored terrorism with the Taliban that exists in Afghanistan right now. And that does not portend well going forward. But I can't imagine what's going through the minds of the people who helped the Americans for 20 years watching that last plane take off knowing they're not on it. Or the Americans that were left behind watching that plane take off knowing that their lives are in danger. What happened and how did we let this get to this point? It's beyond my imagination.
Well, you've also maintained that the U.S. should have kept some forces in Afghanistan long term, as we have in places like Korea and Germany after conflicts there decades ago. But President Biden has said that was a false choice, that the Taliban would have again carried out attacks on Americans if we had remained in the country there. But it's not Germany, it's not Korea, this is Afghanistan. So the question is, was there really an option to stay in the country without continuing to risk more American lives?
You know what? There's always a risk of American lives. That's what military people do. But you know what? From strength, you have peace, right? And we kept it by strength. We kept peace in Germany against all odds. By strength, we kept peace in Korea against all odds. And by strength, we kept peace in Japan against all odds. No one was saying we had to be in a war footing in Afghanistan, but maintaining a presence there so we could have a finger on the pulse of what's going on there is critically important for our homeland. We have an awful lot of terrorist activities that are already obviously going on in Afghanistan, and now they have a foothold without us being there to come to the homeland. But let's not forget, they left a lot of us behind, and they're saying a couple hundred, who knows what the exact number is, but I can tell you from hearing from my constituents that there's an awful lot of people who helped Americans and an awful lot of citizens, American citizens, that are behind enemy lines right now, and their lives are in great peril. And how the heck did we let this happen?
In that vein, you and I spoke a few weeks ago before Kabul fell, and you warned then that Afghanistan would return to a pre-9/11 posture and could become a breeding ground for terrorists again if the Taliban took over. We've already seen that group ISIS-K emerge there with the deadly attack that killed 13 U.S. service members. Do you believe that the Taliban will allow these groups to grow, or is it in their best interest to stop these groups so they can keep a grip on the country?
Hey, the bottom line is, even if you try and say that the Taliban was working with the U.S., which I don't subscribe to that, I think they may have just been trying to get them the heck out of there, they couldn't stop ISIS even under the circumstances right now. So how are they going to be able to stop it going forward if they want to? And if they don't want to, we got a real problem. Let's not forget, there's another group there that has been laying pretty quiet right now, but is ready to metastasize again, and that's Al-Qaeda, who Taliban refuses to tamp down and refuses to go against. So it stands to reason that every possible scenario that you see going forward is that this is going to return to a more of a terrorist safe haven, or the world headquarters of terrorism, if you will. That's exactly where it was 9/11. You couple that with what's going on our southern border and how porous those borders are, and how the fact of the matter is that a large number of known and suspected terrorists have come across that border this year and have been apprehended already. We've got a real problem on our hands, and we've got to have our radars up all over the United States going forward. And that's my job as on the Homeland Security Committee, to try and keep our citizens safe.
So when the Biden administration is pressed with that very question, they say their over-the-horizon presence will allow the U.S. to contain any terrorist threat through airstrikes and counterterrorism operations, as they've already done in recent days. What is your view on that? Can a nearby U.S. military presence still help contain the threat before it spreads without the risk to U.S. service members who would be on the ground?
There's zero chance of that. And the reason is intel is gold. And if you don't have intel on the ground, you have nothing. You may be able to get lucky once in a while and find a target, but those targets that we found all over ISIS territory, all over Iraq over the years to help tamp down ISIS was based on intel. We do not have boots on the ground, so we therefore do not have intel. We don't have the money, the resources, or the brave men and women from America and from the people who helped us that are going to help us now, because we're not there and we've abandoned them. And that it's like a free-for-all. It's like giving kids key to a candy store and telling them not to eat the candy. I mean, that's what we got right now, and it's a real problem. And I'm really concerned about the United States. And I can tell you, I'm not doing this alone. Ray Kelly, two-time commissioner at the New York City Police Department, as well as head of Customs and Border Patrol, said that major cities all across the United States are already ramping up their anti-terror activities out of concern for the increased threat that this poses.
Just quickly, Congressman, before you go, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's something like 70% of the country, I believe, was for withdrawing from Afghanistan. So with that said, you talking about how much of a catastrophe this is, what happens now, and could you have balanced that out in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you ask those same people, do they want to see Americans left behind in the Taliban control? I bet 95% would say no. You want to see a terrorist state develop? 95% would say no. We all wanted the war to end. We all wanted our soldiers to come home. But sometimes you need to have a presence, a peacekeeping presence, or just a presence to let them know that we're there, and to develop the intel to tamp down future violence and future problems. We did it magically after World War II and after the Korean War, and we should have done it here. But regardless, going forward, without boots on the ground, we're going to have a real problem in the United States. And it's my job, and all of us on Homeland Security, to redouble our efforts to try and do everything we can to keep you all safe.
All right, Congressman John Katko, top Republican on the House Homeland Security Committee. We thank you again for your time tonight.
Sure thing. Thank you, and God bless.
Still ahead here on Prime, why the Department of Education sent a warning to 5 states about some of its mask policies inside the classrooms. How eating walnuts could be very good for your health, according to some researchers. And Katrina versus Ida. We're going to take a look by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day, the U.S. Open, America's Grand Slam returns with fans in the stands, if you're vaccinated.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
How cute.
Yes.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people
Squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
Seems to change just about every day.
what is it that you really want to know, need to know,
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
Assault on the Capitol, the ABC News original, exclusively on Hulu, now streaming. With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Wake up with America's #1 most watched morning show. ABC's
Good Morning America.
Right now, with so much at stake, thank you for making ABC's This Week with George the #1 Sunday morning news show versus the competition.
Welcome to This Week.
Welcome back, everyone. Incredibly, Hurricane Ida made landfall on the exact day, the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, and it struck the same part of Louisiana. We're going to take a look by the numbers at how these storms compare. 1,833. That was the astounding and horrifying death toll of Katrina after the levees failed. Thankfully, we don't expect a toll anywhere close to that with Ida. Ida arrived exactly 16 years after Katrina as a Category 4 hurricane when it struck land near Port Fourchon with winds gusting at 150 miles per hour. Katrina was a Category 3 storm when it made landfall with winds of about 127 miles per hour. But it's important to note, you might remember that Katrina had been a Category 5 storm while it was over the Gulf of Mexico, where it picked up huge storm surges. Katrina was enormous. Hurricane-force winds spread nearly 100 miles out from the center at landfall, while Ida's hurricane-force winds extended 37 miles from the center on Sunday. Katrina also produced record storm surge, upward to 28 feet along the Mississippi coast. So far, we are not seeing that kind of surge with Ida. Wind, it seems, is now the bigger problem. Also, the levees were vastly improved after Hurricane Katrina, and so far, they appear to be holding strong. We still have a ton to get to here on Prime. The cases of children with COVID continue to surge. Kanye West out with a new album and, of course, a new controversy. But first, a look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com. World News Now.
And America This Morning.
The best new video.
The breaking news overnight.
Emergency crews called to the town of Surfside.
U.S. airstrikes hitting targets in Iraq and Syria.
The stories people are talking about.
You don't want to shave your legs? Don't. I was going to say.
Oh my. Got it.
And what to expect in the day ahead.
ABC World News Now and America This Morning.
Starting at 2 a.m. Eastern.
Up all night to keep you up to date.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
Right now, with so much at stake, thank you for making ABC's This Week with George the #1 Sunday morning news show versus the competition.
Welcome to This Week.
This is GMA3, what you need to know. GMA3.
A third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon.
It's all about you. Lunchtime on ABC.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're going to move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people
Squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
I'm here to announce the completion of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and the end of the military mission to evacuate American citizens, third country nationals, and vulnerable Afghans.
America's longest war, 20 years in Afghanistan, has now come to an end. He said while the military evacuation is complete, that the diplomatic mission to evacuate any remaining Americans, believed to be fewer than 250 at this point, and any remaining Afghan allies will continue.
I believe that we're going to be able to get those people out. I think we're also going to negotiate very hard and very aggressively to get our other Afghan partners out. And it was not a cheap mission. The cost was 2,461 U.S. service members and civilians killed, and more than 20,000 who were injured. Sadly, that includes 13 U.S. service members who were killed last week by an ISIS-K suicide bomber. We honor their sacrifice today as we remember their heroic accomplishments.
Fire crews losing ground against the rapidly growing Calder fire in Northern California.
Evacuation orders have expanded to include all of South Lake Tahoe. Areas that had been under evacuation warnings are now under mandatory evacuation orders as flames bear down on the town. There has been little to stop flames. It could burn all the way to Lake Tahoe. Firefighters have 2 days left of intense red flag fire conditions, making the fight that much tougher.
The federal government entering the battle over masks.
The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights has sent letters to state leaders in Iowa, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Utah outlining how it says laws barring universal indoor mask mandates prevent schools from taking necessary steps to protect students from COVID-19. And the investigations are targeting whether those prohibitions discriminate against students with disabilities who are at a higher risk of developing severe illness from COVID, and therefore prevent them from safely accessing in-person education.
So when we have politics getting in the way of things, unfortunately, students are ending up not going to school because their parents don't feel comfortable sending them to school. We feel that's a violation, and we feel that all students should have access to in-person learning across the country in a manner that's safe.
Kanye West's new album, Donda, is finally out, but he may not be happy about it. After weeks of delay and 2 flashy listening parties, Ye's album was available for streaming Sunday. On Instagram, Mr. West said, "Universal put my album out without my approval, and they blocked Jail 2 from being on the album. Jail Part 2 features rapper DaBaby, who has been under fire for homophobic comments, and also rocker Marilyn Manson, who has been accused of sexual assault. Both performed at his Chicago listening party. After West posts, Jail Part 2 is now available to stream."
A new study showing a nutty way to reduce cholesterol.
New research suggests could be the key to lowering cholesterol and reducing the risk of heart disease. A study published in the journal Circulation found that older adults eating a handful of walnuts or about half a cup a day for 2 years showed a modest decrease in their LDL or bad cholesterol, which is a predictor of heart disease. Researchers noted the study included mostly healthy participants, but for people who are unhealthy with higher cholesterol levels, the reduction in LDL cholesterol due to walnuts may prove to be much greater.
IKEA may want to buy your used furniture. The store testing out a new buyback and resale program. Customers will be able to sell gently used IKEA furniture in exchange for store credit. The items will then be sold in the store's as-is section as discounted prices. IKEA launched the pilot program in suburban Philadelphia and hopes to roll it out to other cities. There is a catch. You would have to bring your assembled furniture to the store.
And now to the pandemic. We have some alarming news to bring to you tonight about the rise of child COVID cases. The country with more than 204,000 new pediatric cases inside of a week. Also tonight, the latest on those booster shots. Here's ABC's Steve Osunsami.
The government says there are more children in America tonight rushing into hospitals with COVID-19 than at any other point in this pandemic. And that just last week, there were nearly 204,000 new cases reported of sick children, the second highest week on record.
We are worried, how are things going to be when kids go back to school? If we're seeing this now.
This worrying report card is frightening health officials, just as students in Chicago, for example, are heading back to schoolrooms for the first time in nearly 18 months. The Department of Education tonight, they're pushing for face coverings in schools. And they're taking a big step with a new civil rights investigation into 5 states where Republican governors have made it illegal for school districts to require masks. The feds are arguing that those states are discriminating against students with compromised immune systems and other issues.
This is about protecting students and giving them the opportunity to learn in person where they learn best.
On the issue of booster shots, an advisory panel to authorities here at the CDC has just finished wrapping up debate on whether to support the president's plan to get these extra shots to Americans. There was lots of discussion, but no decision made tonight. The president is hoping to see widespread distribution of these booster shots starting September 20th. Phil?
Steve, thank you. And before we go tonight, the image of the day. Take a look. This is from Kabul Airport. After 2 decades of war in Afghanistan, it is where our troops successfully performed their final mission in that nation. Over the last 18 days, they were able to get tens of thousands of people out despite the risks to their lives, which we sadly learned was all too real for those 13 who we will never forget. That's our show for this hour. Stay with ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Phil Lipoff. Thanks for streaming with us. And coming up in the next hour, we are staying on top of a few things. After 20 years, America's longest war is over. More reaction to the end of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Stay with us.
It's an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcast.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
It's the time of suspicion. The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
I'm Phil Lipoff in for Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us tonight. We are monitoring several developments here at ABC News at this hour. Police in North Carolina say a student was shot and wounded inside a high school in Wilmington. The incident led police to place the school on lockdown as deputies searched for the suspect. The condition of that wounded student is unknown to us right now. The 27-year-old man convicted of first-degree murder in the 2018 abduction and killing of University of Iowa student Molly Tibbetts was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 20-year-old Tibbetts vanished in July of 2018 while out for a jog in her hometown of Brooklyn, Iowa. The month-long search for her drew national attention. The Civilian Office of Police Accountability in Chicago is investigating a video that appears to show an altercation between a black woman walking her dog and an officer. The incident happened along the city's lakefront, and in the video, the woman can be heard screaming for help. The woman's attorney says it began when her client was asked to leave the beach because it was closed, and that she has been traumatized by the entire encounter. City officials are urging the public to withhold comment until the investigation is complete. But we begin this hour with the question, what happens to the few Americans and many more Afghan allies still in Afghanistan now that U.S. troops have completely withdrawn? After 20 years of conflict, America is out of that nation. Celebratory gunfire was reportedly heard in parts of Kabul. Another reminder of how this was not the exact ending U.S. troops wanted and the men and women who were fighting over there. ABC's chief foreign correspondent Ian Pannell starts us off with the conclusion of the frantic two-week evacuation and the 123,000 who were airlifted to safety.
With the final flights out of Kabul late today, four-star Marine General Frank McKenzie saying America's longest war was over after almost 20 years.
The last C-17 lifted off from Hamid Karzai International Airport on August 30th, this afternoon, at 3:29 p.m. East Coast time. And the last manned aircraft is now clearing the airspace above Afghanistan.
Nearly 20 years since the attacks of 9/11 and the killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011. Troops staying on the ground for another decade. The general speaking of the human cost of war. The American service members lost two.
It was not a cheap mission. The cost was 2,461 U.S. service members and civilians killed, and more than 20,000 who were injured. Sadly, that includes 13 U.S. service members who were killed last week by an ISIS-K suicide bomber.
He spoke of this painful loss of the service members this week and was asked about the remaining Americans and Afghan allies and the interpreters who helped the U.S. over the years.
Look, there's a lot of heartbreak associated with this departure. We did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out.
The general saying this final chapter was perhaps one of the most painful. The crowds outside the gate and the loss of the 13 service members. When asked about the U.S. servicemen and women that were in Afghanistan, he said this.
Every single U.S. service member is now out of Afghanistan. I can say that with 100% certainty.
And General McKenzie, who did multiple tours in Afghanistan, was asked about leaving this country to Taliban control.
I was very conflicted, actually. But right now, I'm pretty much consumed with the operational task at hand.
Our thanks to Ian. Now let's bring in ABC News consultant Jericho Denman, former Army Ranger who served 15 combat tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. He is home safe now. As you can see, he's here with us from Kabul after he and other veterans spent an awful lot of time getting Afghan allies and their families out of the country, leaving just a half hour before last week's deadly terror attack. Jericho, thanks so much for being with us. Thanks for your efforts over the last couple of weeks, and thanks for your service, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Before we discuss your work on the ground in Afghanistan, I want to get your reaction on today's announcement that the U.S. military has withdrawn for good after 20 years.
Yeah, that's an announcement that I think a lot of us thought that we had come to grips with happening at some point, and I'm just now realizing, as some of my peers that I've been communicating with, that we hadn't, and it did hit like a ton of bricks for a lot of us, and it's something that we're going to have to, really process and sit with for the weeks and months and maybe years to come until it finally kind of sinks in.
Yeah, I mean, it feels surreal, I would guess, after 15 combat tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and now suddenly after 20 years. In recent days, you risked your own life again after 15 combat tours to get Afghan citizens out of their own country. Setting aside the obvious humanitarian reasons, why was this so important to you?
For me, it was a continuation of the commitment that we'd made to that country, and in watching the Afghan government, ANDSF fall so fast, I had it in my mind, and I know a lot of other veterans had it in theirs, that we could glean some goodness out of the whole mess of the last month in saving our partners and getting the people that were committed to the plans that we had for their country, getting them out and letting them continue to pursue happiness in the world.
We understand in order to do that, you had to work through some unofficial channels to get these folks out. First, was that your only recourse? And if it was, what does that say to you about the official efforts on the ground?
It wasn't the only recourse, but it's not really my style or the style of a lot of my peers to just sit back and depend on somebody else to do something. I wanted to go in and actually participate and do everything I could, and additionally use the skills that we've built over the last 20 years, building those innovative, adaptive skills into attacking this new problem set, and yeah, just didn't want to depend on somebody else to do the work. Also, we knew the active duty folks on the ground had their plates full with the withdrawal, and the swiftness of how much the operating environment changed. It necessitated some things that were a little different.
Understood. Well, you're back home now. You're a combat veteran, as we mentioned. You've seen an awful lot, more than most people can fathom. So tell me, if you will, what are some of the images that you saw this past week that will stay with you?
I talked about it last week with some people at home, and 15 combat deployments. This was the worst thing I ever saw. I think it's contextual. You go to combat, you expect to see certain things. When I went to the airport there, I didn't expect to see these things. The sheer desperation, the loss of life, the humanitarian just mess, as well as watching our own troops just doing things that are just out of context and doing great things. But being in a situation where they were also just figuring it out on the fly. So, the images I saw, like I said, it was the worst situation I've seen in all 15 of those deployments, if you want to count that one as 16.
So the U.S. military, as you know, is out now, but there are still countless allies that are left behind, some trying to escape over land to neighboring countries. You know the terrain better than most. How worried are you about those folks?
I'm extremely worried. it's something a lot of people are trying to figure out right now, and trying to, crack the egg on that and figure out how to do this. Afghanistan, as we learned over the last 20 years, is one of the most topographically challenging places on Earth to operate. It's a huge piece of bottlenecks and funnels, and a lot of countries have learned that by fighting there. So it's going to be challenging, but I have faith in my peers and the people that have been working this problem to get it solved and get more of our friends out.
Faith in your peers. Let me ask you this question. Do you have faith in the U.S.-Taliban relationship in terms of diplomacy? You spent a lot of time in country. Do you think this is the same Taliban we encountered 20 years ago? And if not, how did they change?
I don't think they did change. I think they're the same Taliban. I think that they were waiting for us to leave. There are already, rumblings and rumors of them, popping up and rearing their head and acting like the Taliban of old. So I absolutely don't trust that they're going to make good on the Taliban 2.0 lie.
Well, we're just going to have to watch and hope, I guess. You say faith, we can all hope. Jericho Denman, thank you so much for taking the time, giving us your expertise tonight. And again, thank you for all of your service.
Thank you for having me.
Now we're going to turn to Hurricane Ida and the urgent search and rescue underway. In its wake in Louisiana, we are getting a much better picture of the storm's devastation. In New Orleans, the new levees after Katrina did hold, but the city's reinforced power grid did not. And that leaves more than 1 million people across Louisiana without electricity tonight. ABC's chief national correspondent Matt Gutman with the latest.
Hurricane Ida slamming Louisiana as a monstrous Category 4 with reported wind gusts topping 170 miles per hour. And tonight, the scope of the destruction becoming easier to see, but harder to bear. Entire communities almost wiped off the map. More than 1 million customers now without power. The outages could last for weeks, and officials fear the death toll will rise.
There's somebody in there, I think.
The massive search and rescue operation ramping up since the storm hit. This woman pulled out of her flooded car. We traveled to hard-hit La Place, just west of New Orleans. Rescuers in boats and helicopters desperately trying to reach those trapped in flooded homes. Where the town had been, now a lake, accessible only by boat and by aircraft. Scenes defying the imagination. The hurricane toppling semi-trucks, submerging cars. Helicopters swooping down, landing on Interstate 10 to scoop up the most vulnerable, including that woman in the wheelchair. As we arrived, we saw the storm's refugees walking off that exit ramp, carrying what was most dear. Some of them trying to hitch rides from strangers. All of them hoping to get to safety. Michael from the Cajun Navy offered to take us in.
This entire town is submerged. We're driving on the main street.
And there we saw a flotilla of small boats on the water, carrying out the stranded and the exhausted. And it was on dry land that we met these two.
You guys didn't expect it would be this bad, did you?
We didn't expect it to be this bad, and we stayed because we were in a 2-story home, and we thought we would have been safe. The rain just kept coming. It wouldn't stop coming. The rain wouldn't stop.
We pushed further into La Place, seeing entire neighborhoods submerged. The stranded flagging down anyone with a boat.
We put a line at. That's where the water was at.
Jackie and Denise Cooper's mother, Lucille, is disabled, and they asked me to help get her down the stairs.
You guys gonna come back?
No.
Did you think at any point that you might not make it?
Yeah.
Michael had gone back to get help. He needed more boats. Sure enough, within half an hour, he was back. We then drove to the hard-hit city of Houma. On the way, so much destruction. That pair of helicopters flying low, looking for survivors. Ida tearing across Grand Isle like a buzzsaw. New images tonight showing the barrier island underwater. Officials tonight still haven't been able to reach many of the dozens of people who stayed behind there in defiance of mandatory evacuation orders. But helicopter crews reportedly saw people on their rooftops giving the thumbs up. Just over 30 miles from there, the Coast Guard surveying the damage near Galliano for the first time. Homes shredded, roads flooded. This chopper flying a patient to a hospital. At least one levee was overtopped in Plaquemines Parish, south of the city, and reports of people trapped in their attics in Jefferson Parish.
This is an area that, if you want to think of it like swampland, there's alligators out there.
Our Ginger Z in nearby Jefferson Parish, just south of New Orleans.
The town of Lafitte has one way in and one way out, and that one way is covered by water. They are protected up to 7 feet. Their levees were overtopped during the storm.
Rescuers doing everything they can to reach survivors.
From house to house, we're going past them, and if people want to be evacuated, we're putting them on the boats to get them out.
President Biden declaring a major disaster in Louisiana, promising a vast federal response.
That's our job. If we work together, we're going to stand with you and the people of the Gulf as long as it takes for you to recover.
And tonight, the concern in the hours ahead is the people still stuck in their homes without 911 and without power. Many now turning to social media.
Right now, we're checking on everybody that we can.
Concerned families messaging Vincent Ocello over Facebook, asking him to check on their missing loved ones. And stranded residents reportedly giving a thumbs up to the Coast Guard waiting to get out.
Joining us now by phone is Jefferson Parish Sheriff Joseph Lapinto. Sheriff, thank you so much for taking the time. We know cell phone is spotty and you are dealing with a big mess down there, so we appreciate it.
Anytime.
All right. What are you seeing on the ground right now in terms of devastation and where the rescue effort needs to go?
You know, rescue effort has been, I guess, kind of finishing up, right? We had two outer cities that are outside our levee protection district, kind of fishing communities down there. Lafitte being one of them, which got inundated with water. Most of those houses are built 10 feet above the ground, and or will be good. The structures will be fine themselves. The water came up, but they're trapped. The people that stayed home are trapped in that location, but some of them are okay with that. They literally wave from their porches and say, I'm good. When the water goes down, I'll be fine. But the water absolutely came up a lot higher than it's really ever come before. So the houses that are not at that elevation of 10 or so feet really got water in them. Where we were able to probably save about 100 people today, go in and rescue them and get them out of the situation that they were in. Grand Isle is a different story. Grand Isle, you probably had less than 20 people staying, including the first responders that were on scene. They're really cut off from anybody with LA1 being shut off, which is a normal case in a storm. We were able to fly over there today. It looks like the ones that are on the island appears that they are already starting to clean up. They've got their front loaders out and cleaning the sand off the roadway. Don't know for sure if they've had any injuries or fatalities. Obviously structural damage, but they're out there doing what they normally do, is start to clean up. So it won't be until tomorrow or the next day before we can get down there and figure out exactly what happened, because they're kind of completely cut off from communications.
So, Sheriff, it sounds like places like Lafitte and Grand Isle, we know you sent a helicopter over to Grand Isle, places like that, you're really not going to be so sure until you get in there, right?
That's correct. I mean, look, there's a very limited amount of people that stay, and look, this community is very, very tight-knit. They know exactly who stayed on the island. I guarantee you the people that are on that island have went and checked on everybody that stayed. Whether the outcome is good, bad, or indifferent, we don't know yet up here, but they know. They know who stayed, and they went and checked on them. I can promise you that. And now they're back to the cleaning process, and we just got to get down there to be able to help them. Lafitte's a little bit different. Most of the people, there's not a lot of wholesale devastation, meaning the entire structure collapsed. They're absolutely devastation, meaning they have floodwater. And so most of those people were able to get out if need be, able to get to their porch and able for us to be able to go rescue them. Now, you will have certain houses that, went 6-8 feet underwater. And if a person didn't get to the attic, we may have a problem. And when the water goes down enough, we'll certainly search those particular dwellings place by place.
In catastrophes like a hurricane, when we speak to people, you can go by their voice and how stressed and how concerned they are. It seems to me like at this point, you have been working for 24 hours now, and you and your deputies, tell me, what have you been able to do? It seems like you're saying the rescue effort is coming to an end over the next day or so. Do you have the resources you need to conduct this?
You know, I'm lucky with the parish that I have. We've got 1,400 employees that are dedicated to this job. And being in South Louisiana, we know how to handle hurricanes. Don't send us to an earthquake, but for a hurricane, we have the boats, we have the ability, we have the tools that we need to get the job done. So, you know, right now, rescue missions are good. Certainly need to get the men and women in the department some rest, you know, but they're going to go out there and continue to do the job. Clearing the streets, allowing energy to be able to come in, get our power back running. So, you know, the water, the sewage systems, all that stuff can get back so we can bring our population back. And that's the difference. You know, we're going to work through the night. We'll work through the day, and we'll keep working through the week until we can get us back to normal.
We've heard some estimates of weeks, not days. Does that sound about right with what you're seeing?
You know, it's hard to tell. I got to tell you, I was on the ground very quickly after Hurricane Laura in Lake Charles last year. And in that situation, I would say 95% of the telephone poles were snapped off, and it looked like pixie sticks. This storm, although the devastating winds that had occurred, my area of Metairie and Jefferson Parish and even going forward, although we've got a lot of roofs that have damage, the telephone poles actually fared very, very well. We certainly have telephone poles that are down, but nothing near the devastation that we saw with Hurricane Laura. But we have a major distribution line that feeds this system that is down. And if energy can, you know, get in there and obviously reroute that, I think our system will come back a little sooner. But I don't know the possibility of that, to be honest with you. And so it's kind of too early to tell on that. I still think it's going to be weeks. But, you know, they've got a lot of job to do. But it's not – I don't want to be optimistic. We have people that obviously lost everything, lost their homes. But it's not as bad as I guess I've seen in Hurricane Laura. And, you know, we're optimistic that obviously a lot more people fared a little bit better than expected.
Oh, boy, that does sound really good to hear. Jefferson Parish Sheriff Joseph Lapinto, we know you got a long couple days, weeks ahead, and we certainly know all your 1,400 employees and all of the first responders down there live down there, so they're concerned about their homes and their loved ones, too. Our best to all of you in the coming days and weeks.
Thank you very much.
No doubt a long road ahead. Matt, thank you. Right now, I'm joined by retired Lieutenant General Russell Honore, who led the Defense Department's Joint Task Force Katrina, the military relief effort after that devastating hurricane back in 2005. Lieutenant General Honore, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Good evening.
Good evening. We know, like so many others, it's hard to get a Zoom signal out right now, so we are appreciative that you were on the phone. First off, just let me ask, because I know you're in and around that area, are you and everybody around you okay, safe tonight?
Yeah, we're in Baton Rouge. We had got some lights out. To the people with the lights out, it looked like a lifetime, but Baton Rouge is not in bad shape. Places east of us, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, took some major hits. Livingston Parish, St. John the Baptist, St. Charles, Vermilion Parish, Terrebonne, and of course Orleans, Plaquemine, and St. Bernard Parish took major hits. And Jefferson Parish, and we've got 1 million plus people without electricity.
You are so familiar with this particular area. As you've watched the scenes unfold today, and as you just described to us, what's going on in southern Louisiana, what concerns you the most right now?
To get the search and rescue completed, we've got some rain bands coming in. You can see the clouds just east of Baton Rouge between here and New Orleans. That could disrupt the aerial search being done by helicopter, and a lot of surface rescue going on. And to get the roads cleared, you're going to need to get the roads cleared in order to do a complete search. Level 1 and level 2 searches. Level 1 search, we're going to knock on every door and see if anybody's there. Then level 2, you got to go back and generally go inside that home to see if anybody's still there. So all that still has to be done over a very large area from Houma all the way north to St. Tammany Parish. So that's the dilemma we got right now.
How long does a level 1 search and rescue take? How long in between level 1 and level 2? And can that go on for days?
That can go on for days. And it's complicated by the fact that when we did this after Katrina, the city was flooded. and 80% of the people were gone because the city was underwater, and we had a very successful evacuation. And when I say the city, I mean the general area where Katrina came in. And here for Ida, we got multiple parishes that taken a major hit, but we've got a lot of people that did not evacuate. And, of course, on top of that, we got the COVID situation going on in Louisiana because so many people refuse to take the shot, anti-vaxxers, and our hospitals are full. There's a lot of people stuck at home now with no electricity and no AT&T service as a result of the storm. So it makes it hard to communicate with people. Then we're going to have a big shortage of gas because most of the gas stations are out of gas. The people that did leave emptied the gas stations when they left. So that's going to be a major effort to get gasoline at all those gas stations.
That was also an unfortunate consequence of Katrina, as we saw in the aftermath of that storm. Of course, the levees are drastically improved since the disaster of Hurricane Katrina. Explain to us what's been done there to prevent that kind of catastrophe from happening again, and what work, if any, still needs to be done, in your opinion, to better prepare communities on the Gulf Coast for these kind of extreme storms.
As is the case, you know what to do is to get the appropriations to make it happen. We got a $15 billion levee system that we'll put in after Katrina to prevent a repeat of Katrina. It was built at a Category 3 storm capacity, and that system held, it worked. But places where we don't have that level of federal levees, such as in some of the lower parishes, they've got levees that are run by the parish. Some of those levees got overtopped based on the size of the surge water, and it just went over them. And it's just so happened we have an appropriation to start a small levee that will prevent that from happening again in St. John. And they're working on the construction and design built by the Corps engineers as we speak. It just didn't get here quick enough.
Well, that is good news that there is an effort underway. Even if it was too late for this time, it probably won't be for the next time. As you know, the Gulf Coast has been hit by multiple storms in recent years. The communities still haven't fully recovered. We know this, even from Katrina back 16 years ago. You were in the Lake Charles area just last week, 1 year after that area was hit by Hurricane Laura. What did you see on the ground there, and what do those communities still need the most?
Well, the number one thing they need is the federal government, the Senate of the United States, to approve the supplemental. It's a crying shame. It's been a year, and the Senate has not approved the supplemental of $3 billion to bring public housing and public buildings back into operation for the people or the communities that were affected by Hurricane Laura. And we've had two presidents go there and told them help is on the way. Well, the FEMA help did happen, and FEMA did a lot of good work there. But what's got to happen is they've got to go back and look at a lot of the poor people. Many of them got $500 from FEMA because a lot of the inspections were done in a COVID environment without an inspector going to the house, but looking at it from the sketch on a computer or something. We need to help Lake Charles. They need more help from FEMA with roofs, because those plastic roofs are all deteriorated now. And in the poorer part of Lake Charles, the northern part, where more of the poor people live, it's really devastating to see what they're living in. And that area has a very low vaccine level. So the hospitals are full. Too many people in Louisiana, we're a red state, buy into the fact they're not going to take the shot. And that has made things more complicated from the medical perspective. For those people might get hurt during the storm and during the recovery, because our hospitals are full, because our people refuse to take the damn shot.
You're fighting on so many fronts, the storm damage, and of course, as you point out, right in the middle of the worst pandemic we've seen in generations. So, Lieutenant General Russell Honore, we do thank you for taking the time tonight in the middle of all of this to speak with us. We're glad you and your family are okay. Thank you, sir.
Be safe. Good luck to our first responders.
Absolutely. And while those desperate search and rescue efforts continue down in Louisiana, out west in California, one of America's most popular vacation spots is under threat from wildfire. Kana Whitworth on the ground for us there. Kana, have people in that area listened to warnings to evacuate the South Lake Tahoe area?
Yeah, Phil, so this is what Lake Tahoe looks like right now. There's literally a coyote running through the street over here. I mean, it's a ghost town. This is a place that is normally heavily populated during these summer months, and we're now seeing the last few people evacuating from South Lake Tahoe right now. Statewide in California, we have more than 43,000 people under these mandatory evacuation orders, and as the Caldor fire moves closer, we're seeing the smoke settle in along that ridge line, and so it's making it really hard for firefighters to use their air attack in conjunction with their ground crews. Now, the neighboring state of Nevada also has an emergency declaration out as well, along with California. The Caldor fire alone yesterday scorched more than 20,000 acres, and it's approaching that 200,000 acre mark, and it's burning incredibly erratic, and it's very scary. And Phil, we're not out of the woods yet, because we will likely have a red flag warning here at least through tomorrow.
Kana, thank you. And before we go, we leave you with this tonight. This was tweeted by the 82nd Airborne. You are looking at the last soldier to leave Afghanistan. In the tweet, it reads, "This was an incredibly tough, pressurized mission filled with complexities, with active threats the entire time. Our troops displayed grit, discipline, and empathy." That is the truth. And that's our show for tonight. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Phil Lipoff. Thanks for streaming with us.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed